Okay, this is an article. I'd like to have your feedback on what the research shows.
I thought we were done.
This is from the Daily Mail, which is a British newspaper. Dementia cases to double by 2030, says World Health Organization. The number of people suffering dementia around the globe is expected to nearly double to 65.7 million sufferers by 2030, the World Health Organization has warned. By 2050, it is likely to rise 70% above today's figure of 35.6 million sufferers. Dementia is caused by a variety of brain illnesses that affect memory, thinking, behavior, and the ability to perform everyday activities. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia and makes up about 70% of the cases. The report published with Alzheimer's Disease International said there are 7.7 million new cases of dementia reported each year. And then skipping down to the article, it says, the study also highlights a general lack of information and understanding about the disease. So if you could each tell me what the research shows.
The new guys first. I just read the article that came out in the past 6 months from Dale Bredesen, who's a dementia researcher in Los Angeles. And my sister lives 45 minutes from his clinic, and she has dementia. My mother had dementia, and I don't remember what you call it. Alzheimer's, yes.
Old-timers.
Yeah, old-timers. So in this study, he reported on 10 patients, 9 of whom recovered. They were moderate to severe Alzheimer's patients. One did not recover and was the most severe case. But the others returned to their normal lives, including back to work. And my mother left library science at the journalism school in Columbia, Missouri early because she couldn't remember how to do the Dewey Decimal System. So to me, this article was the first. I'm sure others have read other articles that are introducing the concept of the reversibility of dementia. And they had 30 different interventions, and the person who is healthy in their living, but everyone in their family had the disease, got a different mix of those 30 interventions to turn them around than someone who was a couch potato and ate only garbage and had no meaning or comfort in life and were getting dementia. That was a whole different set out of the 30. So it introduces several concepts. One is that there's such a multifactorial cause of diseases, and we've grown up in a system that wants to find one cause, one solution, one pathway to fix it. And we realize then in a few months or years that that disturbs lots of other pathways. So this idea that there's multiple pathways and different people have different sets of needs. So there's the personalization of the care once you begin to get the idea of what to do. So that's very important. And the idea now that when something new like this happens and is put forth, we need to have it documented in many different hands and many different settings before we understand how it's really going to work. For example, like the potassium in the whole foods plant-based diet might need a little filtering when you are working with an advanced kidney disease patient. So I think this is very exciting, and I don't think we know how to use that tool yet unless some of the other panelists do, but that's our work, is to stay on top of that, because we are the generation of people that that news story was talking about. Dale Bredesen, Bredesen, right? And it was published in the journal Aging, A-G-I-N-G.
I love what you said about this being such a multifactorial disease, and I think what we're just starting to understand is it's not a disease that's just the luck of the draw, it's another lifestyle disease. And if we're consuming plant-based, a plant-based diet, we can help to reduce oxidative stress. We can help to reduce the process of atherosclerosis in the blood vessels in the brain. we can increase, antioxidant status, we can decrease inflammation. There are so many things we can do, but there are also things that we need to be very conscious of. And I think one of those things is having sufficient essential fatty acids in the diet. And there are some people that are really doing an extremely low-fat diet, and their intake of essential fatty acids may be so low that they're not producing enough of the biologically active forms of omega-3s, the eicosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, that are important for brain health. And so these are things that need to be considered as we're trying to put together a truly optimal plant-based diet. And so there are some studies showing that vegans have a reduced risk, and some studies have actually shown increased risk. And I think it really depends on the quality of the diet. So we're wanting to maximize the components of the diet that are protective, minimize the toxic. There are so many components in the diet, all of the persistent organic pollutants and heavy metals and so forth that are neurotoxic and can contribute to these kinds of diseases. So I think we need to be conscious of that, but we also need to be conscious of getting enough essential fats, getting enough vitamin D, getting enough of the essential nutrients.
I'm on. Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I can continue on that note, just to give a little more information. I'm in complete agreement that the phytochemicals and antioxidants present in a broad assortment of natural plant foods protect the delicate membranes and tissues of the brain and the eye. The eye is a window to the brain, and the people get macular degeneration and diabetic retinopathy, and if they have eye disease, they have brain disease too. And you could see the disease in the eye, usually you can see the disease in the brain, but we know that those diseases of neurologic tissue are protected by the broad assortment of phytochemicals in green vegetables, in red foods, in purple foods. In other words, blueberries and blackberries are very protective, and green vegetables, especially green cruciferous vegetables, are very protective, and the organosulfide compounds in onions are very protective. And so natural plant foods eaten in their natural state supply the brain and the rest of the body with nutrients it needs for normal function to allow us to live a long and healthy life without getting degeneration of these organs. But when you eat a diet that's so high in processed foods and animal products, both, which neither of them contain phytochemicals and antioxidants, our tissues suffer with the buildup of free radicals and advanced glycation end products, build up and destroy neurologic tissue, and we get poor circulation of the brain and shrinkage of the brain with aging. And once you get significant shrinkage of the brain, you lose memory and you're somewhat demented, and that part is not reversible. You can't grow back a new brain. You can't grow, brain tissue can't regrow, and a lot of dementia is not reversible, but it would have been preventable. And so the major cause of dementia is atherosclerosis and lack of oxygen and nutrient delivery to the brain from a poor diet. Now, on the other hand, what Brenda just brought up is the fact that some vegans are placing themselves at risk of having dementia with later life. Number one, if you're going to be on a vegan diet, a healthy vegan diet, and you're going to live a lot longer, and you're not going to have likelihood of having an early life death due to sudden cardiac death or heart attack or cancer, so you might live to be 85, 90, 95, 100 years old. More chance for you to have brain injury or memory loss or dementia in your later years if you don't take good care of your health when you're younger. And a lot of vegans are taking risks with their health because their fervor and excitement about the enthusiasm for this diet makes them feel, I think, invulnerable to think that they don't have to be careful with nutrients, that to have adequate nutrients. We did a study, or I should say people that I was involved with did a study on 166 vegans who were not supplementing with EPA and DHA, but most of them were using adequate levels of flaxseed or flaxseed oil or walnuts. And we found that out of the 167 people, 67% were borderline deficient or insufficient based on an omega-3 index of being 4 or above. The lab considered 6 or above ideal, but we considered 4 adequate, and 67 people fell, I think it was 67% fell below 4. Well, that meant that about, there's a certain percent were adequate, did have adequate levels, but the more concerning part was 27% were below 3, and a small percent, I think 5 or 6% were below 2. In other words, there were some people that were very, very deficient in their omega-3 index, which could forebode them developing dementia in their later life. But yet there's a broad spectrum of the vegan community thinks that's not necessary, but the facts are, and studies haven't been done to know that's not necessary, and we have to be conservative here and err on the side of caution and make sure if there are people who are going to be on a strict vegan diet, they either check a blood test to check adequacy, or they take a low-dose supplement. And we did in the study, when we took the people that were deficient, we supplemented them later with a very low dose, about 200 milligrams, of an EPA-DHA combination, and almost all of them, I think 49 out of 50, became sufficient with that little tiny dose. You didn't need much. The body, in other words, the body utilizes that small amount if it needs it. It doesn't, whereas if it didn't need it, it wouldn't utilize it. And I don't think that the omega-3, omega-6 index is that important, because if you're thin and not eating fat, if you're burning off your calories, you're not storing a lot of omega-6 fat, you're burning it for energy, and your body can take the omega-3 from the ALA, or the walnuts and flax seeds, and the little bit of maybe algae-derived DHA you're taking, and hold on to that, utilizing it appropriately on the cell membranes and in the brain. But one thing I wanted to add is that when we looked at the data in this study, and we tried to ascertain whether the people who were low were those not eating walnuts and flaxseed or any ALA. Maybe we could have had the fact that if they ate enough of those precursors to DHA and EPA, they would produce enough, and we found that that didn't help. That wasn't true. There was no good correlation between the ALA consumption and the EPA and DHA, the DHA consumption, meaning that the primary differentiating feature for deficiency was genetic differences in conversion enzyme activity. That some people just produce it adequately and other people don't, and some people absorb certain nutrients less effectively than others. So it's a little bit of caution that that we're talking about here. That there are some people in the vegan community don't recommend eating nuts and seeds. The diets are extremely low in fat, and they also don't recommend taking an EPA or DHA supplement. And that combination can be potentially risky for some people if they live long enough later on in life. And we want to make sure that that for us who really want to live this way, we want to make sure we're protected, or at least being conservatively careful here.
This is an important subject, so I'll try to share as concisely as I can the experience I have with this. Number one, so everyone knows the numbers, probably everyone here knows it, that my generation, the baby boom generation, it's conservatively estimated that 25% of us will have Alzheimer's disease. I didn't say dementia, memory loss, Alzheimer's disease. This equates to millions of people worldwide. Many of you listening today, take heed to what we're saying. The second thing, so we don't alarm anyone about vegan diets being deficient, this is the least deficiency diet on the planet Earth. Meat, dairy diets are deficient diets. But erring on the side of caution is something that I'm completely in agreement with. Now, 20 years ago, Framingham, which is a offshoot of Harvard, who everyone admires if you like research. When Framingham says it, you know it's correct. They came out with a study and said that standard medical blood tests were not correct on B12. And up until then, Hippocrates Institute was the come-to place in the vegan community globally, because we had done thousands and thousands and thousands of blood tests, many reflecting the B12, and we bet that that was correct. Framingham told us it was not. So I get into a panic because I'm out traveling the globe telling people B12 is important. Now, why are we speaking about B12? It's the most important nutrient to stop memory loss, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease, and neurological disease. It's the number one most important. We then rapidly adopted a nutritional blood test, and I had never done that as a nutritionist before because I thought they were all frauds. They were taking blood out, seeing what was floating around in the bloodstream and saying you had it or didn't. Finally, a philanthropic gentleman in Texas who reversed disease, I believe it was cancer, on diet, funded endlessly the University of Texas, and they created something called SpectraCell test. And so 20 years ago, 19 years ago, we adopted that, and this is a very definitive test. hold your horses out there in the world and here. 70% of the population of the world lacks B12. Meat eaters, dairy eaters, fish eaters, chicken eaters have about a 7 to 8% higher incidence of B12 deficiency than do vegans and vegetarians. Raw food vegans out of Fontana's work, Washington University, St. Louis, shows us raw food vegans have the least. Now why? Because we're the best, we're wonderful? No. Because B12 is a bacteria from soil. If you're a vegan, you're cooking your food, the bacteria is dead. If you're a meat eater, a fish eater, a chicken eater, a dairy eater, you're cooking your food and you're not eating vegetables, so of course you have a slighter high. But vegans and raw food vegans have B12 deficiencies too. So the one supplement that our medical team absolutely suggests all of you look into and think about taking is a proper bacterial form of B12. If you don't take any other supplement, please do that. But then I completely concur with what was said here. The studies done in Los Angeles, which I've read, by the way, and Dr. Fuhrman. Essential fatty acids are incredibly important. Now, you've been conned by the fish oil and fish industry to think fish oil is a great source. It is not a great source. I said last night, and I'll repeat again, the international organization, the #1 organization on oils, discouraged the consumption of fish oil. So do I, and I'm sure everyone here does too, because it leads to disease, cancers, heart disease, yes, heart disease, etc. Where do fish get their oil from? Joel basically alluded to it, from algae. So part of the Hippocrates diet for 30 years had been algae. If you're at Hippocrates and on the diet, you're on algae. And it is the only omega oil that literally is identical to the fat that makes up your brain. So when we take flax or we take walnut, that happens, but it's so minuscule amount. You know, if you take a pound, you may get a little tiny bit. So going directly to the algae are my suggestion. Now, if you have a deficiency, they actually make an extract from the algae. And I highly encourage you finding that. On the internet, I'm sure you can find that, and consider that. That's what our medical team would tell people to do. The next thing is, my wife wisely calls dementia and Alzheimer's stage 3 diabetes. There has been plethora of research that shows that high sugar contents lead to memory loss, dementia, etc. So removing that. And Sunday, to close the conference, I'll be having a 90-minute conference on sugars and all the latest research, and we'll touch on dementia with that. But when I was writing a book for the Swiss 15 years ago called Longevity, I said, as long as I don't just have to write about nutrition, I'll do this. And I was then looking at the best research on dementia, memory loss, etc. It was being conducted at Harvard at that point by a very young man who was interested in centenarians. And when they had discovered the classic gene for Alzheimer's disease, they found centenarians, 100-year-old people, that had the exact gene but didn't have dementia. And was it a food commonality that prevented that? No. It was use of mind. Now, in those days, they were doing crossword puzzles. Now we do luminosity or a computer program for it. These were very active social people. They were dating. 100-year-old, they were out dating. They were socializing. They had a community that surrounded them. So let's not only get stuck on the dietary aspect or supplemental aspect. Memory use is going to keep you young, and you know that. How many of you have known somebody that was completely vibrant at 70 or 80 and their wife or husband died, and within months they lost it completely? And the last thing I'll have to say about this is that you're going to end up with much more dementia because of the lower oxygen counts. If you saturate the bloodstream in the veins, the vessels of the body, with animal fat, it's just common sense. If you grab your neck and squeeze it hard, you're not going to be very conscious in a short time. And you've been figuratively grabbing your neck and squeezing it hard by filling your veins up with whipped cream and every other ungodly thing that you seem to have liked in the past. So diet does play a role, but there's more than just diet involved in this issue.
I think I'd like to add something about B12. and maybe we should just talk about that briefly because it's important, because you brought it up. And that is that the B12 blood test, the normal is considered, let's say, between 250 and 900. And what you started to allude to, which is true, and that a normal B12 blood test between 250 and 500 or between 250 and 450 doesn't guarantee that you have normal B12. Even though it might be normal in that range, but it may not be. And that's where we sometimes draw a test called an MMA, methylmalonic acid, or even a homocysteine, but a methylmalonic acid is usually better, can help differentiate that borderline low B12, whether more is needed or not. But one thing we have to keep in mind that as we age, that the need for B12 increases because our absorption and utilization of B12 can decrease, and we can have less production of intrinsic factor in the elderly. So we have to be concerned about B12 deficiency being a cause of memory loss or problems in later life. So it's important to make sure you have adequate levels that's high enough. And the other thing to recognize is that the RDI for B12, which I think is 4 micrograms a day, is not adequate for a vegan. Because if you are on an animal product-based diet and you're having a little animal products 20 meals of the week and you're absorbing 1 or 2 milligrams per meal and you get 4 or 5 micrograms a day added up, that's going to work for you. But for a vegan who's taking a B12 supplement once a day or once every other day, you're not going to absorb a lot of that supplement. You're not going to absorb, you only absorb a certain limited amount, and maybe you only absorb 2 milligrams. You took 10 milligrams or 5 milligrams, but you only absorbed 2, that's once a day. You didn't even get the RDI into you, and that may not be enough. So the point I'm making now is that if you're taking supplements to meet your B12 need, you have to go a little higher because you're not getting them regularly each meal. We have to take like 50 to 100 or 200 if you're on, especially as we age, to go a little higher as we get over the age of 75 when your B12 absorption goes down. Because we can absorb it not through the normal intrinsic factor receptor mechanism, but by diffusion, when we take a higher amount, we can get the extra amount into us. So I think it's important that we become a little bit of like B12 experts. Maybe you could add to that.
Is sublingually better?
It doesn't matter.
Well, let me add to it. It's the type of B12. Is it bioactive or is it not? Is it a chemically made B12 or not? This, to me, is the most pertinent question.
Just to clarify, the RDA is 2.4 micrograms.
2.4.
And 2.4 micrograms, but that is not sufficient to keep homocysteine levels down. And when homocysteine starts to rise, our risk of heart disease and dementia and even problems with birth defects and so forth also begins to rise. And so most experts are suggesting that if you're taking, two things that's really important to know. Number one is that the Institute of Medicine recommends that everyone over the age of 50, so regardless of whether or not you consume animal products, everyone over the age of 50 should not rely on animal products for B12. And that is very simply because you must cleave the B12 off the protein it's bound to, which it's bound to in animal products, in order to be able to absorb it. And probably somewhere close to 10 to 30% of people over 50 don't produce enough enzymes and acid to be able to actually do that job of cleaving the B12 off the protein. And so it doesn't matter whether or not you're vegan or non-vegan. And what's really important is vegans may actually be at an advantage if they're using a regular supplement, whereas non-vegetarians may think they're fine because they're getting B12 in animal products, and they don't even realize that there's that risk after 50. So that's important to know. So what do we recommend? Experts recommend somewhere 1,000 to 2,500 micrograms 2 to 3 times a week, okay? And if you're consuming methylcobalamin, then because it's slightly less stable, you may need to be taking 1,000 micrograms daily rather than 2 or 3 times a week. And the other thing to know is if you're taking it on a daily basis, the recommendations range from about 10 to about 250 micrograms a day. And we still don't know for sure exactly how much is needed because it's different for different people depending on how efficiently you're able to absorb it. So I think those are just a few other things. And I was just, when you mentioned B12, I went, was I brain dead when I was talking about this, forgetting to mention B12, because it is hugely important. And vegans who are,
Oh, it went off.
uh-oh, I got cut off.
Here, try this one.
Vegans who are not supplementing tend to have levels in the 120 to 160 range, as opposed to 400 plus range that they should be at. So this is, just don't fool around with B12. Make sure you have a source.
You know, being in practice for 25 years and taking care of a lot of people in the vegan community, I've seen a lot of people develop severe B12 deficiency. There was a contingency of people who felt that B12 was not necessary and that, a healthy diet of natural foods would give us all we need, and I've seen people die from B12 deficiency. I had one young man came to me, he was a national champion kickboxer, and he couldn't walk, couldn't stand up, he couldn't balance himself and couldn't walk anymore without assistance.
That's one of the symptoms.
Yeah, because it affects your neurologics, your longer nerves first. But he made a recovery, actually. With B12 supplements, he got well, and he told people on his radio show that he recovered from MS. Really. Then I actually had, then I knew somebody who actually passed away because of a super high homocysteine, but a B12 level of 40. His B12 level was 40, and his homocysteine was up in the 90s, actually, and he developed atherosclerosis and had... and died due to B12 deficiency. I even knew a person years ago who came to me because she was a big, her guru said you don't need B12, and I told her that you don't need B12, and she was actually near dying and still refusing to take B12.
Crazy.
Because she had developed this problem. And I had another woman who was actually paralyzed and couldn't walk for a long, long time, and got somewhat better, but didn't get all her function back from B12 deficiency. Well, I've seen a lot over the past years.
You led us into a good conversation here, both of you. I think let's talk about the symptoms of B12 deficiency. Pernicious anemia is one of them. So if your nose is tingling and you're scratching it a lot, your hands, your extremity, your feet, your toes, that's pernicious anemia. Now you're lucky if you see that, because some people could get into paralysis, like Joel just said. You're starting to lose your memory, and you may have been perfectly fine a year ago, and now you're skipping a lot. You don't really see that. You may also have dizzy, and it's not low blood pressure. Of course, if you have low blood pressure, that's possible, or blood sugar problem. But if you're having these symptoms and know, you've gone to a physician and know you don't have either of the above, you have to look at the B12. And again, when I look at 70% of the population globally, we work with an international audience lacking this. This is not a small issue. This is not a small issue at all. This is the most important issue you're probably going to hear us speak about tonight. So please look into this and learn about it and read about it and begin supplementing.
Can you take too much?
If you take a proper B12, you cannot take too much.
The early signs are tingling of the feet would be an early sign.